Now, I'm never sure whether to regard myself as a photographer or whether I'm just someone who prioritises getting outside and who takes the camera for the walk. In either case, I'm lucky. These sunrise colours this morning, they're actually straight out the camera, and it's just stunning. We're coming from the Orkney Islands in the north of Scotland. The sea was never that far away from us, and it's in our DNA and partly makes us who we are. And coming from a fishing town, I've actually had friends who've been injured by the sea, and I've grown up amongst families who have lost loved ones to the sea. As an Orcadian child, you learn to respect the sea, as not many youngsters in Orkney swam well, if at all. And that respect I had as a child, well, it's still there. But as an adult, I find the sea fascinating, and that play of the rocks and the water crashing over it, only to trickle back slowly towards the sea, just in time for the next wave to repeat this process. It's simply amazing to watch. As someone once commented to me that the waves wash over these lands, but its spirit remains, and it's true that. Often the more dramatic this interplay of rocks and water is, well, the more mesmerising it becomes. And this video for me, it's probably an overdue one, and this is a very quick look at seascapes and shutter speeds. Now, I can be seen along shorelines with the camera both in Orkney when I'm home and also here in New Zealand taking photographs and just playing around with shutter speeds when I'm around water. And many of my works here you can see, well, most of them actually are seascapes or at least have water in them. But I run the risk that when I play around with long shutter speeds that some of these shutter speeds would be longer than the videos would be if I made a video about them. And some of these are up to 15 to 20 minutes long. But I'm conscious that I don't just want to only shoot extreme long exposures, so I'm going to have a little look at different effects with different shutter speeds in the second half of this video. So I am down on the Mount Maunganui beach on the east coast, and I'm fighting against the rising tide here, and I've got quite a predicament of one camera set up here and the other one set up over here, and both rocks are getting closer to the sea. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up and I'm just going to take a few quick shots. So this video is not about getting lovely compositions. This one is about maybe taking 3 different types of shutter speeds whilst we record the sea. So this video here is also going to be, this camera here is also going to be shooting video. So once I can work out how I do this, I can't quite remember. So what I've done here is I've just zoomed the big camera in on the 2 rocks that I'm going to take. So what I'm seeing here is just the waves lapping over these rocks, and we're at the point of the tide where they're just coming over the top, and sometimes the 4th or 5th big wave are swamping these. So I'm going to try and capture some of the splashes, and I'll also try and take one completely swamped out, and I'll take one just at maybe half a second or something. So see how I get on with this. Here is actually at 500th of a second at f/4.5 at 800 ISO. Now this is not how I normally shoot, but all I'm trying to do here is just capture some of these waves coming over the top of the rocks. That didn't work, so I'll have to try a few of these. There's a bigger one coming in now. We'll try this. If it breaks at the right time, it might be okay. Another one. There's two coming in now. And that's all very well to try and capture frozen movement, but I think as soon as you try and capture that to a wider scene with such a fast shutter speed, what you end up with is you end up with such a messy scene because there's so much visible data in your photograph, because you haven't just frozen the droplets of water, you've frozen everything. And it just sometimes can be quite confusing to look at. Now, sometimes you'll hear landscape photographers talking quite flippantly or quite matter of fact about reducing things by 10 stops. And what that means is we have to use black filters to try and reduce the light going onto the sensor by 1,024 times. But in order to do this properly, you need to probably be in and around 30 seconds and above, and some of my stuff's up to 15-20 minutes long because I use ND in low light and I also use a cable release. So I'll try and keep this at about 30 seconds today just to see what 30 seconds does to the same scene that I've just taken at 500th of a second. So reducing your light by just one stop, you actually have to double your exposure time. A second stop, you would double that new exposure. A third stop, you would double that new exposure. A fourth stop, double that new exposure, and so on, right the way up to 10 stops and beyond. So back down to 100 ISO because I don't need to freeze anything. And I'll take this up to f11 and I'll try this. Looking at the light, I think we're probably around about 30 seconds today, so maybe 20 seconds. I'll try 20, see how we get on. So I'm just going to take this 20 seconds at f11 and the camera's going to record everything that happens in this scene between now and 20 minutes time. So we just have to wait, just have to be patient. Now the waves are actually washing over this as we're taking this, so we won't get a full colour of the rock. That's okay actually. What if I go up to, I'm going to go up to 30 seconds just to try and make it a little bit more pronounced, and I'll zoom a little bit further in to crop in on the rocks a little bit. So 30 seconds, that's it on. And because there's a lot of white in the foreground here, this whole white thing will become very white because the sensor is picking up the overexposed parts, what it thinks to be overexposed, and that's the white surf in the foreground. So that's going to be very white because all the white's moving around here. We've had one wave go over the top, second one over the top now, so I don't know what we'll get from this one. That was a big one. Now that's actually quite cool. There's a lot of surf and a lot of movement here, so the foreground has become really quite misty. And you'll recognise that from a lot of my shots that I take. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take one without the filter and I'm going to focus in on the rocks, and I'm going to try and play around with some shutter speeds in and around half a second, 1 second, and what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and take this just as these water trails come back off the rocks. And what's going to happen with that is the sensor will obviously pick up the lighter parts of the waves as they cascade over the rocks just there. Clearly we're not going to get the movement in the rest of the sea, but that's okay. That's what I'm trying to achieve. So there's too much light here to have this done with no filtration at f11 because there's just too much light available, and I could probably run back to the camera I'm going to get cut off. Could run back to the camera to get the 6th stop and come back up here and do this, but instead I'm going to choke it down with f32, which is going to give me a second, and I'll shoot with a second and I'll shoot with half a second to see what difference that makes. So I have to wait for a wave that's big enough to come over the top of this rock, and once it comes over the top of the rock, it's the curtaining of the white waves back down to the sea that I'm going to try and capture. There. Well, that's worked. That's quite cool. Now that's a second, so I'll take this down to half a second. And that's also managed to capture these streaks as well. There's so much movement in the foreground here, I'm not really getting a big difference between the 1.5 second exposure time, but if I just try and reduce this down to maybe 1/3 of a second, just to try and capture some of the foreground moving less. Here's a wave coming now. So that started allowing me to record some less movement in the foreground and in the background as well, but it's still been enough to streak these waves coming back off the rock. So that's just played around with 1/3 of a second, half a second, 1 second. I'll see if I can push this to 2 seconds to see what it does. Yeah, there's a lot going on there, but it's just really interesting to start playing around with shutter speeds and see. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here because I'm actually going to get cut off, I think. Just give you an indication of the difference that these make too. I'll take a couple more though. Now to watch me try and get down off here with this camera. This is always precarious because the camera gear is worth so much money and it's so awkward and heavy to carry. Fortunately, these rocks are not slippy, I don't think. Jesus Christ, that was higher than I thought. So I've actually run out of beach. I've cut off this way, so I can usually get round this way, but the tide's coming in, so I am too late. So let me just get set up. And I'm just going to take some movement between rocks and I'll do the same thing again with playing around with these 3 shutter speeds. So again, this is not about a nice shot, this is just about the shutter speeds and the motion of the water. Now every body of water has its own sweet spot depending on water depth, the frequency of the waves and the distance between any 2 points in your frame. This first one is at 1/80th of a shutter speed, so there should be hardly any movement in this at all, and it'll just illustrate that there's far too much motion to capture. Okay, it's just messy. So when I choke this down, if I choke this down to 1/3 of a second, it'll just start introducing some mixture of the whites and the aqua colours from the sea. It's actually really nice and soft, even at 1/3 of a second. It's starting to look really, really nice. And I think if I go any longer than that, it's going to start getting quite fuzzy because there's so much movement here with water. Half a second, wait for the next wave. Yeah, we're just starting to lose a lot of the detail here at half a second. So if I go to a second, that's going to make it even more pronounced. So let's do that. Manual. Yeah. It's just making a difference every single time you do something more. And just for the purposes of completing this process, I'll put the 10 stop back on, which will give us 30 seconds again, just to let you see this one all bleached out. And with that, you'll actually start understanding what it is I do with my photography. And I'm thinking that this one here, there's so much water in this little inlet here, it's just going to be completely whited out in the sea. We'll get some trickles down off the rocks, and the background should be quite faded out as well. But the further you go away from the camera, the less difference a long exposure makes. Long exposures have a bigger difference in the foreground than they do in the background. So yeah, the 30 seconds one's completely fuzzed out with spray and white waves and wash. in between these rocks. So that'll give you an idea though, the way that I head with a lot of my works that look very minimalist. Because I guess one of the big things for me is that long exposures minimise your landscape and leaves you to focus on the stuff that's left behind. And it's probably the stuff that's left behind that caught your attention in the first place, I think. So that's the kind of stuff that I shoot. I'm going to go off this beach. I'm cut off this way. I'm going to get cut off this way if I leave it too long because I've got quite a hike back to the car. But I'll leave you with a shot I took about 12 months ago, which is just slightly further around the corner, taken at sunset, 2.5 minutes long, with a lovely orange sky. I'll leave you with that. So get outside, have some fun, just play around with shutter speeds and seascapes, or at least moving water, to see the differences it makes to your shot. Until then, see you next time. Have fun. Ta-ra.